I want to give you a bit of a preview on the chapter that gets into threats to internal validity. This is chapter 11 in the second edition of your book. And so essentially, there are lots of ways to screw up a study. And some of these ways have names that you should be familiar with. Now, a couple of the names here and there might be slightly different in other textbooks. It's more important that you can actually recognize, hey, that would be a problem. And attaching a name to it would be good for a bunch of them. So in an experiment, of course, the goal is to completely isolate the independent variable, so it is the only thing that's different between your groups. And then again, you go on, measure the dependent variable, and if there's any difference in the measured variable, it must be due to the IV, because that's the only thing you had different. But again, things can arise that you have to be careful about. So let's see. This is going to be quick because the book really does a very good job of explaining it, giving you examples, so you're going to have to do a close reading again to get it, rather than just hear me tell you what's in your book. At the beginning of your chapter, they give you 3 examples of sort of bad studies. And what I'd like you to notice is these are actually pretty, you can imagine these would be common things. You had to talk about a future job you might have, or a job you have right now. And are you a consumer or a producer of research? Now, these are kind of research producers, but I think you could probably see yourself being in a position where you have a question you want to answer. One was in a dorm, one was, a camp counselor. And you might think to yourself, well, I'm a psychology major, I took research methods. Maybe I could do a pretty good job of collecting some data to answer this question I have. And so I think the first and third example, bad experiments, kind of fit a really nice, like, hey, that's, somebody's trying to do a good job and recognizing I can't just come up with my own ideas, but if I'm a little more systematic, I may get a better answer to my question. Now, the reason they have these listed as bad experiments is, of course, in all 3 examples, there's no comparison group. So, you try to do something to get the dorm residents to save electricity, and actually electricity use goes down, but you have to think, well, but between summer and fall, people aren't using their air conditioning as much. So those things are energy use decreases anyway. How do I control for that? Well, maybe have a dorm that didn't have the efforts made to try and get energy conservation. And if their, decrease in use between summer and fall, which normally happens, is not as much as the dorm that was like, okay, guys, we're going green, turn off those lights. And that dorm with the intervention, the treatment, decreases their energy use more, now we have some real data. So they're just kind of good first efforts, but as a psychology major and someone who's had research methods, you should be able to recognize, oh, we have to do it better. You're forgetting an alternative explanation. All right. So the comparison group is what's missing in those sort of bad studies at the beginning of the chapter. But now they go on, and there's just a whole host of things that could screw up your data in your study. The book summarizes them pretty well in table 11.1. Now, that's not going to be enough to just look at that table. You are going to have to go in the chapter and really read the more, detailed explanations of, like, what is this? What does regression to the mean mean? Now, I could kind of give my spiel, but the book does a really good job. So just read it. If you have questions, post a question on the Your Questions blog for the class, and I will give you more feedback. But I'm going to refer you to the text because it's good on these. Now, what I will do is I'm just going to come on a couple of things that tend to give people problems when they're trying to keep all these things straight. So one would be a history variable. And all my classes are like, I don't quite get the history variable thing. All right, just think about it. You're running your study. Let's use that example where a professor, students do terrible on the first exam. So she goes, okay, I'm going to give you guys some study techniques. Here's some things that should help you do better. She trains her class. Exam 2 comes along. They do better. Okay. Now there are sorts of other reasons that this might happen. If she didn't have a comparison group, another class that didn't get the techniques and they didn't improve, well, now that would have been a decent study. But let's just think about the one, okay, I gave the study techniques, scores went better. If history variable is the reason scores got better, that means that there was something outside of the class that happened that influenced those exam 2 scores, and not the treatment, which was giving the study techniques. So let's say, exam 2 goes terrible, the professor gives you study techniques, and exam 2 goes better, but it's because a good number of the people actually went out and got tutoring and then came back. Or something changed. Maybe the psychology department changed their policy and they said, instead of getting a C for your class to count toward the major, you have to get a B now. And everyone was like, oh my God. And they're like really hunkered down and tried really hard regardless of the study techniques, and they did better. That would be a history variable. It's some event or something that happens outside of the actual confines of the study that explain the change in the scores that were measured. Okay, so your book has more examples, so do go to that. Let's see. Oh, testing versus instrumentation. Okay. Testing is when you're an issue with repeated measures. So people are getting practice. It is practice effects would fall under this if you're getting better at what you're doing. And so you might want to think like exam 1, exam 2 might be a testing effect, but we would actually call it instrumentation, because in the testing effect, the task itself doesn't actually change. That would mean the actual test or exam you're taking was the same each time and you get better and better. That would be a testing effect. Instrumentation is when the thing that's gathering the data, it changes. So if you think about exam 1 versus exam 2, it's over different material, different questions. So the thing where, your score is the dependent variable in that example, but the thing we used to get your score was a new test with new questions. So that would be an issue. If exam 2 was simply easier, well, then that's an issue of instrumentation. It wasn't the study techniques the professor gave the class. It was an instrumentation issue. It was an easier test, so scores went up. Okay, so hopefully you can see the difference. Your book also includes under testing effects, fatigue. Now, other books might include that under maturation. Maturation is when there's something sort of about the person, the participant, that changes over the course of study. We usually think of it as, developmentally. Young kids become better readers or become better coordinated. They're going to be able to do motor movements better after time has gone by. But some books also include if you get bored or tired or something as maturation. Your book is talking about testing, like if you're doing a task over and over and over and over as part of the study, and you're just like, by the end of it, you're just tired. They're going to say that's a testing effect, because it's just this repeated testing that's changing something about your performance and your score. Okay, attrition, I want to just point out, that's when some people drop out of the study. Now, here's the thing. In almost any study, people drop out. Like they don't finish whatever it is they were supposed to do. It's not always a problem, though. It is only a problem if the reason they dropped out could in some way influence the thing you were actually testing. For example, between exam 1 and exam 2, well, if all the students that just did terrible and just can't get the material drop the course, well then yeah, the class average is going to be higher in exam 2. So attrition in that case would be the threat to internal validity. If I'm studying anxiety and I want to have two groups, one's going to be my control group, they don't get treatment, and my treatment group, I say, okay, I'm going to take care of your anxiety by forcing you to do all these public speaking things for like 10 times and then you'll get over it. Well, what if my most anxious people drop out of the study after 1 or 2 of these public speaking things? They're like, I hate this, and they drop out. And by the end, I found like, hey, my people are not as stressed anymore. This public speaking treatment worked. Well, that's because the people that were really freaked out are no longer in your study, and that's important, and that's a threat to internal validity. So those are a couple that tend to come up. Again, if you have one that you're reading the book and it's just not making sense, you will have a worksheet coming up to also help you, but right now use the quiz as a way to really help you test and see if you got these ideas.